The council chamber stretched before Michael Grant like the throat of some cosmic beast, ready to swallow him whole. He stood alone on the circular platform at its center, surrounded by 300 meters of empty space in every direction. Above him, arranged in ascending tiers that climbed toward a domed ceiling painted with star maps, sat representatives of 473 alien species. Their eyes, in all their various forms, focused on him with emotions ranging from curiosity to contempt to something that looked disturbingly like hunger. Michael had never felt smaller in his life. And he was only human after all. Earth had joined the galactic community just 3 years ago. 3 years. Some of the species staring down at him had been part of the council for millennia. High Arbiter Quelon, a being that looked like a mass of crystalline structures floating in a containment field, spoke first. Its voice resonated through translation devices embedded in the chamber walls, making the air itself vibrate with authority. Michael Grant of Earth, you stand accused of violating Interstellar Commerce Law, Section 4, Subsection 12. Specifically, the unauthorized liberation of designated property belonging to the Vethrak Consortium. How do you answer these charges? Michael's throat was dry. His diplomatic advisor back on Earth had warned him this would happen. But knowing it intellectually and standing here facing it were entirely different experiences. I freed a person, Michael said, his voice smaller than he wanted it to be. Not property. A person. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Translator devices struggled to convey the mixture of amusement, outrage, and confusion in hundreds of alien languages simultaneously. Kelon's crystalline structures rotated slowly. You acknowledge the action, then? The Valorian female, designated as Item 7394, was legally purchased by the Vethrak Consortium and assigned to commercial food preparation duties on Station Meridian. You, as a business owner leasing commercial space, employed this property without proper compensation to its owners. Furthermore, you declared it freed from its obligations and placed it under your protection. Is this accurate? Michael's hands clenched at his sides. Her name is Tika, and yes, that's accurate. 2 months earlier, Michael had been living what he thought was a decent life. He owned a small restaurant on Station Meridian, one of the thousands of commercial stations floating in neutral space where different species came to trade, work, and sometimes even coexist peacefully. The restaurant served human food, mostly, catering to the growing population of Earth expatriates who had left their homeworld seeking adventure among the stars. Business was good. Not great, but good. Michael had always loved cooking, and there was something satisfying about introducing aliens to Earth cuisine. Some species couldn't eat it, of course. Biology was complicated across the galaxy, but enough could that he stayed busy. The problem was he couldn't run the entire restaurant alone. He needed help. Finding staff willing to work for human wages was difficult. Most species either found humans too strange to work with or demanded payment he couldn't afford. That's when the employment agency offered him a solution. Indentured workers, they called them. Species from the lower tiers of galactic civilization who worked in exchange for room and board. The agency representative, a smooth-talking Quelton with too many eyes, assured him it was all perfectly legal. Michael had hesitated. Something about the arrangement felt wrong. But he needed help, and the agency insisted these workers were treated well, that it was a mutually beneficial system. That's how Tika came into his life. She was Valorian, a species Michael had never encountered before. She stood about 5 feet tall with bluish-gray skin, large eyes that seemed to hold ancient sadness, and 4 arms that made her incredibly efficient in the kitchen. She didn't speak much at first, just nodded when given instructions, and worked with quiet intensity. She was brilliant at cooking. Within a week, she had memorized every recipe Michael showed her and began suggesting improvements that actually worked. Within a month, half his regular customers were coming specifically for dishes Tika had refined. Michael started paying her, even though the agency said it wasn't necessary. Just small amounts at first, but it seemed only fair. She worked harder than anyone he'd ever employed. That's when he noticed the bruises. They were subtle at first, hidden beneath her uniform. But one day, she reached for a high shelf and her sleeve pulled back, revealing dark marks on her arm. When Michael asked about them, she flinched and quickly covered them, saying nothing. The next week, there were more. a mark on her neck, a cut above her eye that she tried to hide with her hair. Michael's concern grew into alarm, then into horror when he finally convinced her to tell him the truth. The agency didn't just place workers, they owned them. Valorians were classified as a Tier 5 species, which in the complex legal framework of galactic civilization meant they were property, not slaves, the law insisted. Property species were different. They lacked certain genetic markers that supposedly indicated advanced sentience. The fact that Tika could cook, learn, remember, create, and clearly feel pain didn't matter to galactic law, and the agency enforced discipline. When Tika had asked for a day off to observe a Valorian cultural tradition, they had beaten her. When she had saved money Michael gave her instead of spending it, they had confiscated it and added more bruises. When she had smiled at a customer a Queltan overseer decided she shouldn't smile at, they had broken one of her fingers. Michael had stared at her as she told him this in halting words, her voice barely above a whisper, expecting him to punish her for complaining. And something inside him had simply broken. Or maybe it had finally started working correctly. "You're free," he had told her. "As of right now, you're free. You work for me, you get paid fairly, and nobody touches you. Nobody." Tika had looked at him with her large eyes full of disbelief. "You cannot do this. The law—" "I don't care about their law," Michael said. "Earth recognizes all sentient beings as having fundamental rights. You're under human protection now." He had contacted Earth's diplomatic mission that same day. They had tried to talk him out of it. Humanity was new to galactic politics, they explained. Earth couldn't afford to challenge established legal frameworks. The Council would respond harshly. Michael didn't back down. He hired human lawyers, filed paperwork declaring Tika a legal employee under Earth jurisdiction, and refused when the agency came to collect their property. That was 6 weeks ago. The situation had escalated faster than anyone expected. The Vethrak Consortium had filed complaints with the Council. Other species who profited from the property classification system had joined them. Earth's diplomats had tried to negotiate, but Michael refused to surrender Tika. So here he stood, in front of the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy, facing charges that could result in everything from massive fines to imprisonment to expulsion of all humans from galactic commerce. Arbiter Quilon's structures rotated faster, indicating either thought or agitation. The laws you reference, human, apply only to your species and only within your designated territories. Station Meridian exists in neutral space governed by Council law. Under that law, Valorians are classified as property. This classification has existed for 7,000 years. It is based on comprehensive biological and psychological testing conducted by the finest scientific minds in the galaxy. Testing that concluded Valorians aren't sentient enough to have rights. Michael asked, his voice growing stronger. "I've worked with Tika for months. She thinks, she feels, she creates, she mourns, she hopes. She's a person. Your emotional attachment does not override established law," another voice boomed. This came from Representative Vorth, a massive being covered in chitinous armor who represented one of the Council's founding species. The property classification system maintains order across thousands of worlds. Without it, economic collapse would follow. "Your interference threatens the stability of galactic civilization." Michael wanted to shout at them. He wanted to explain that no economic system was worth treating sentient beings as objects. But he could see in the expressions around him, in the way various aliens shifted or remained perfectly still, that many here already understood that. They just didn't care. "Where is the Valorian now?" Quellan asked. "Safe," Michael said. "On Earth." More sounds rippled through the chamber. Earth was bold, bringing a contested piece of property into its own territory. This council could demand her return, Vorth stated. Earth's continued participation in galactic trade depends on following established law. Michael took a deep breath. This was the moment his advisors had warned him about. The moment where humanity's entire relationship with the galaxy hung in the balance. He should back down. He should apologize and negotiate for a settlement. Instead, he looked up at the hundreds of species surrounding him and said clearly, "Then Earth will withdraw from galactic trade. We will not participate in a system that treats people as property, and we will offer sanctuary to any being of any species that seeks it. The chamber exploded with noise. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages. Quellen's structures spun wildly, and Michael stood in the center of it all, alone and terrified, but somehow certain he had just said the most important words of his life. The emergency session of Earth's United Government convened 18 hours after Michael Grant's declaration echoed through the council chambers. President Rebecca Stone sat at the head of a table surrounded by representatives from every major nation, their faces displayed on screens that wrapped around the circular room. Outside, protests filled the streets of every major city on Earth. Some demanded Michael be arrested for endangering humanity's place in the galaxy. Others hailed him as a hero. "He has potentially destroyed everything we've worked for," Ambassador Kwame Osei said, his voice tight with frustration. He had spent 3 years carefully building Earth's diplomatic relationships. "Do you understand what withdrawal from galactic trade means? We rely on alien technology for medical advances, energy production, faster-than-light travel. Our entire economy has been restructured around interstellar commerce." "He freed one person from slavery," countered Minister Yuki Tanaka. "Are we really debating whether that was worth it?" "It's not slavery according to galactic law," Osei shot back. "We can't apply human morality to a civilization millions of years older than ours." President Stone raised her hand for silence. "I've read the reports on Valorians. They score higher on cognitive tests than half the species we trade with. They create art, maintain family bonds, and have complex languages. The only reason they're classified as property is that they lack some genetic marker the Council decided was important 7,000 years ago." "That doesn't change the political reality," Osei insisted. "The Council controls access to over 10,000 inhabited systems. If we're expelled, Earth becomes isolated. Our colonists on other worlds will be forced to choose between staying with their adopted planets or returning home. Our students in alien universities will be expelled. Every joint venture we've established will collapse. Then maybe the Council needs to understand that Earth has something they don't," said General Marcus Chen, head of Earth's small but growing space defense force. "We have principles we won't compromise." "That's not weakness. It's strength," Stone's communication device buzzed. Her aide whispered something urgent. "We have a situation," the president announced. 6 more Valorians have just requested asylum at our embassy on Station Meridian. And it's not just Valorians. 2 Kelpari and a Yith family are also claiming protection under Earth's offer of sanctuary. The room fell silent. This wasn't just about one cook anymore. Michael's declaration had opened a door, and beings across the galaxy were trying to walk through it. On Station Meridian, Michael's restaurant had become an impromptu refuge. Tika sat in the corner, trying to process what her employer had done. Around her, 3 other Valorians huddled together, their faces showing the same mixture of hope and terror she felt. They had worked in different parts of the station, all owned by different consortiums, all bearing the marks of their master's discipline. Michael moved between them, offering food and water, trying to provide comfort despite having no idea what he was doing. His human staff, Carlos and Jennifer, worked alongside him. They had stayed even after learning what was happening, even knowing they might never work in galactic space again. "Why?" one of the Valorians asked Michael in halting Common Galactic. His name was Ven, and he had escaped from a mining consortium that had literally worked dozens of his people to death. "Why risk everything for us? We are nothing to humans." Michael knelt down to look Ven in the eyes. "That's where you're wrong. Your people, that's enough." The restaurant's door slammed open. 6 Vethrak security officers pushed inside, their tentacles writhing with aggression. Behind them came an official from the consortium, its multiple eyes fixed on Tika and the other Valorians. "This establishment is in violation of council statutes," the official announced. "Release the property immediately or face criminal charges." Michael stood, placing himself between the Vethrak and the refugees. "These aren't property. They're under human protection." "Humans have no authority here," the security chief hissed. "You are on a council-governed station. Surrender them, or we will take them by force." Carlos and Jennifer moved to stand beside Michael. 3 humans against 6 armed aliens. It should have been no contest. But there was something about the way they stood, completely unwilling to move, that made the Vethrak hesitate. you touch any of them, and Earth will consider it an act of war," Michael said quietly. The words should have sounded absurd coming from him, a restaurant owner with no military authority. But somehow, standing there protecting people from slavery, he meant every word. The Vethrak official's eyes darkened. "You are one species among thousands. Earth is insignificant. Then why are you scared?" Jennifer asked. "If we're so insignificant, just leave. You know what will happen if you try to take them. This becomes a diplomatic incident. Earth will escalate. And suddenly the whole galaxy is watching to see if you'll back down or if you'll start a fight over the right to treat people as property." The standoff lasted 5 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, the Vethrak withdrew, but the official's parting words were cold. "The Council will vote on sanctions against Earth tomorrow. When your economy collapses and your people starve, remember that you chose this for beings that are not even your own species." After they left, Michael's hands started shaking. Jennifer grabbed him before he could collapse. "That was insane," she said. "And incredible." Tika approached Michael slowly. "You should not have done this." "For me, for us, you have made your species enemies across the galaxy?" "No," Michael said, finding his voice again. "We've made ourselves stand for something. That's different." Back on Earth, President Stone made her decision. She addressed the world on every channel. Her image broadcast to billions of humans and countless aliens monitoring Earth's response. Today, one of our citizens, Michael Grant, declared that Earth would not participate in systems that treat sentient beings as property. Some have called this reckless. Some say it will destroy us economically. They may be right about the economic consequences, but I am formally endorsing his statement as official Earth policy. She paused, letting that sink in. Effective immediately, Earth offers sanctuary to any being of any species that seeks freedom from bondage. We recognize all sentient life as having inherent rights regardless of genetic markers or council classifications. We will accept whatever economic consequences come from this position, because some principles are worth more than profit. The galactic response was immediate and severe. 17 major trading partners suspended contracts with Earth. 3 colonies found their supply lines cut. The price of imported technology skyrocketed. Unemployment on Earth jumped by 3% in a single day as alien-owned businesses closed their Earth operations. But something else happened too. Messages started flooding into Earth's communication networks from beings across the galaxy. Many came from species that weren't classified as property, but sympathized with those who were. Some came from property species themselves, sending desperate pleas for help or simply thanking humans for acknowledging their personhood. And a few messages came from council members themselves, sent through encrypted channels. Ambassador Ose received one from Representative Hilra, a species that had joined the council 2 centuries ago. The message was brief. "Watch the vote tomorrow. Not all of us agree with the property system. We've just been waiting for someone brave enough to challenge it." On Station Meridian, more refugees arrived at Michael's restaurant. Word had spread through the underground networks that property species maintained in secret. By midnight station time, 23 beings from 7 different species crowded into the small establishment. Michael kept cooking, kept feeding them, kept promising they would be safe, even though he had no idea how he could keep that promise. Earth's embassy on the station sent additional security. 10 human Marines arrived, armed and ready to defend the restaurant if necessary. The station authorities protested, but Earth's ambassador was firm. "These beings are under human protection. Any attempt to seize them will be met with appropriate force." It was a gamble that could start a shooting war. But as the night wore on, and more property species found their way to Michael's restaurant, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had always maintained the property system because no one challenged it. Now someone had, and the carefully maintained order was beginning to crack. Tika watched Michael working through the night, exhausting himself to care for strangers from species he'd never met. She had spent her entire life being told she was property, that she existed only to serve others. But watching this human risk everything for her and others like her, she began to believe something she never thought possible. Maybe they weren't property after all. Maybe they had always been people, just waiting for someone to see them that way. The council vote was scheduled for the next day. The whole galaxy would be watching. The council chamber filled slowly, representatives arriving with an unusual solemnity. What should have been a routine vote on sanctions against Earth had transformed into something far more significant. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched on broadcast channels, waiting to see how the most powerful governing body in known space would respond to humanity's challenge. Michael Grant stood once again on the central platform. But this time, he wasn't alone. Tika stood beside him, along with 5 other Valorians who had fled to his restaurant. The council had demanded their presence as evidence in the proceedings. Earth's legal team had agreed, but on one condition, that Tika be allowed to speak. High Arbiter Quellon's crystalline structures rotated slowly as it surveyed the chamber. We convene to address Earth's violation of established law and its formal declaration to harbor property belonging to legally recognized owners. The motion before this council is comprehensive economic and diplomatic sanctions against Earth until it complies with galactic statutes. Representative Vorth, the massive armored being who led the faction supporting the sanctions, activated his speaking platform. This is not complex. Earth has stolen property. Earth has encouraged others to steal more property. Earth has declared its intent to continue this theft. The response must be severe and immediate. We propose total trade embargo, expulsion of human diplomatic missions, and seizure of all human assets in council space. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Those were harsh terms, the kind usually reserved for hostile civilizations that attacked council members. Earth's ambassador Osei stood at the human delegation's position. Michael could see the strain on his face. The Council recognizes the right of member species to maintain internal policies on sentient rights. Earth simply applies that principle. We acknowledge beings as people based on demonstrated sapience, not genetic markers. Your acknowledgement is irrelevant, Vorth rumbled. Council law supersedes individual species preferences in neutral territories. Then perhaps Council law is wrong, a new voice said. The chamber went silent. Representative Hilra, whose species had been council members for 2 centuries, had activated her platform. She was small, bird-like, with iridescent feathers that shifted colors with her emotions. I invoke ancient right of challenge. I call for review of property classifications under current scientific understanding. Quellon's structures spun faster. Representative Hilra, such a review has not been conducted in 3,000 years. The process is complex and lengthy. Then we are overdue, Hilra replied calmly. I have served on this council for 80 years. In that time, I have reviewed the studies used to justify property classifications. Many are based on research conducted before half the species in this room had developed space travel. Scientific understanding of consciousness has advanced considerably since then. Another representative rose, this one a Nolvan whose species was known for logical thinking. Representative Hilra makes a valid point. I have independently verified that property classifications rely heavily on the presence or absence of a specific genetic sequence. However, more recent research suggests this sequence is not actually required for advanced cognition. It simply appeared consistently in the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, creating an assumption of its necessity. Michael watched in amazement as more representatives began activating their platforms. Species he had never heard of, some clearly uncomfortable, spoke up. They didn't necessarily support Earth's actions, but they acknowledged that the foundation of the property system deserved examination. This is absurd, Vorth bellowed. The property system has maintained galactic stability for millennia. Questioning it now because one primitive species makes emotional appeals undermines everything we have built. I would like to hear from the Valorian, Hilra said clearly. If we are debating whether a species is property or people, perhaps we should listen to that species itself. Quellon's structures stopped rotating for a moment, then resumed slowly. This is highly irregular. Property does not testify in council proceedings, which is precisely why we should make an exception, Hilra countered. If Valorians truly lack the capacity for higher reasoning, testimony will demonstrate that. If they possess such capacity, then perhaps the classification should be reconsidered. After a long pause, Quellon spoke. Very well. The Valorian designated as Tika may speak. Briefly, Tika's hands trembled. Michael squeezed her shoulder gently. Just tell them the truth, he whispered. Tika stepped forward, her 4 arms clasped in front of her in a gesture of humility that her species had learned over thousands of years of servitude. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. I am Tika. I was born in a breeding facility controlled by the Vethrak Consortium. I have never known freedom before I met Michael Grant. I was taught from hatching that I exist to serve, that I am property, that thinking of myself as anything more is incorrect and deserving of punishment. She paused, looking up at the hundreds of species watching her. But even when I believed I was property, I still felt pain when struck. I still felt joy when I created something beautiful in the kitchen. I still mourned when my clutch sister was terminated for breaking a dish. I still hoped, secretly, that somewhere in the galaxy there might be species who would see me as something more than a tool. Her voice grew stronger. You ask if I am people or property. I think in languages you do not speak. I dream of things I have never seen. I create recipes that did not exist before I imagined them. I love my family even though we are scattered across 12 systems sold to different owners. I remember my childhood. I plan for a future I never thought I could have. If that is not being people, then I do not understand what the word means. The chamber was completely silent. Then slowly, something unexpected happened. A few representatives in the upper tiers began a gesture of acknowledgement specific to their cultures. More joined. Within moments, nearly a third of the council was showing signs of respect, typically reserved for addressing fellow sentients. Vorth slammed his armored fist against his platform. This is manipulation! Of course, the property has learned to mimic sapient behavior. That proves nothing except that Valorians are skilled at deception. With respect, Representative Vorth, the Nolvan speaker said quietly, your species uses similar arguments to dismiss the concerns of species you trade with. If we apply the standard you propose, how many of us in this chamber could prove we are not simply mimicking sapience? The debate exploded then, not just about Valorians or Earth, but about the fundamental nature of consciousness, rights, and law. Hours passed. Michael watched as the galaxy's most powerful beings argued about questions humans had grappled with for centuries. Who deserved rights? What made someone a person? Could ancient laws remain valid as knowledge expanded? Finally, Quellen called for order. This council is clearly divided. We cannot vote on sanctions against Earth until we resolve the underlying question of property classifications. I propose we establish a commission to review all species currently designated as property, using modern scientific understanding. Until that review concludes, all actions related to property beings are suspended. Suspended? Vorth's voice was dangerous. You propose we halt the entire property trade system? That represents 17% of galactic commerce. I propose we pause to ensure our laws are just, Quellen corrected. Unless you believe maintaining commerce is more important than maintaining justice. It was a brilliant political maneuver. By framing it as justice versus commerce, Quellon made it nearly impossible for Vorth to argue without appearing purely mercenary. The vote was called. When the results appeared, Michael felt his knees weaken. By a margin of 53%, the council voted to suspend the property system pending review. It wasn't abolition. It wasn't freedom for everyone. But it was more than he had dared hope for. Ambassador Osei approached Michael after the session. You realize what you've done? You've destabilized galactic trade. Billions of beings rely on the current system for their livelihoods. Billions of beings are treated as property, Michael replied. I'll take that trade. You're naive if you think this is over, Osei warned. The factions that profit from property trade won't accept this quietly. They'll fight the review. They'll try to undermine it, and Earth will be their primary target. Then we'll be ready, Michael said, though he had no idea if that was true. That night, in his small apartment on Station Meridian, Michael finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion. Tika sat across from him, still processing what had happened. What happens now? She asked. I don't know, Michael admitted. But whatever happens, you're free. That doesn't change. Free! Tika repeated the word like she was tasting something new. I think I am beginning to understand what that means. 3 months after the council vote, Earth's economy was in crisis. The suspension of the property system had triggered exactly the chaos Representative Vorth had predicted. 17 species whose economies relied heavily on property trade had formed a bloc refusing to engage in commerce with Earth or any species supporting the review. Supply chains collapsed. Technology imports dried up. Human colonies on border worlds faced food shortages. President Stone stood before a crowd of protesters outside the United Government building. They were angry, frightened, and demanding she reverse the sanctuary policy. "My daughter can't get treatment for her genetic disorder because we can't import the medicine," one man shouted. "Is one alien cook worth my child's life?" Stone had no good answer. She returned to her office where Ambassador Osei and General Chen waited with grim expressions. "The situation is deteriorating," Osei reported. "3 of our colonies are considering breaking away from Earth governance to maintain trade with the property bloc. We're looking at the potential fragmentation of human space." "What about the council review?" Stone asked. "Any progress?" "They've been stalling for months," Chen said. "The commission keeps requesting additional studies, additional testimony, additional data. Meanwhile, the property species already freed are stuck in legal limbo. They can't work in most systems because their owners still claim them. Earth is hosting over 2,000 refugees now, and we're running out of resources to support them." Stone turned to look out her window at the city below. "What would you have me do? Send them back into slavery to save our economy?" "I'm saying we need to be realistic about what one species can accomplish against a galactic system," Osei replied carefully. "Maybe we pushed too hard, too fast." Before Stone could respond, her aide burst in. "Ma'am, you need to see this. It's happening on 17 worlds simultaneously." They crowded around the display screen. Images from across the galaxy showed property species walking off their jobs, refusing to work, standing silently in public squares. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. But it was coordinated in a way that shouldn't have been possible. On Nexus Prime, 2,000 Kelpari workers stopped operating the mineral refineries that powered the planet's economy. On Hellion Station, Yith families blocked the docking bays with their bodies. On Meridian itself, Valorians gathered outside the consortium headquarters, simply standing there with signs written in languages most council species couldn't read, but that translated to the same message. "We are people." "It's spreading," Chen said, scrolling through reports. "Hundreds of thousands of property beings are participating." "How did they organize this?" Michael Grant watched the same images from his restaurant, which had become an unofficial coordination center for the resistance movement. Tika worked beside him, managing communications through networks the property species had maintained in secret for generations. Networks that spanned the galaxy but that the Council had never bothered to look for because property wasn't supposed to be capable of such. "Organization. The Council ignored us for so long they forgot we could think," Tika explained to Michael. "Every property species has underground networks. Ways to pass messages, share information, protect each other. We have been waiting for a moment like this for centuries." A Valorian named Ken, who had become one of the leaders of the resistance, activated a communication channel. "The strikes are working. Production on 47 worlds has stopped. The economic impact is already larger than the sanctions against Earth. Will the Council respond with force?" Michael asked. "They cannot," Ken said with something like satisfaction in his voice. "If they use violence against property, they admit we are worth killing. If we are worth killing, we are worth considering as people. They built their system on the assumption we would never resist. Now we are, and they have no idea how to respond." Representative Hilra contacted Michael through a secure channel that evening. Her feathers showed colors that indicated stress. "Your friend Tika is more connected than you realized. The Council is in emergency session. The economic damage from the strikes is catastrophic. Vorth is demanding military intervention. But I and others are arguing that the strikes prove the property species are capable of organized resistance, which contradicts the basis for their classification." "What do you need from us?" Michael asked. "Keep them striking. Every day this continues, more council members question the system. We are close to getting enough votes to officially recognize property species as provisional citizens pending final review. It's not full freedom, but it's better than property status." "How close?" "We need 18 more votes, but 18 members are from species whose economies depend on property trade. They won't vote for recognition unless something changes their calculation. After Hilra signed off, Michael turned to Tika. How far are your people willing to take this? As far as necessary, she said simply. We have lived as property for thousands of years. A few more months of struggle for a chance at freedom is nothing, but the struggle became more dangerous. On Nexus Prime, local authorities tried to break the Kelpari strike with force. 12 strikers were killed. Images of their bodies spread across galactic networks, and something unprecedented happened. Species that had never spoken out against the property system began to protest. Students on university worlds, workers on industrial planets, even some council species' civilian populations began demanding change. Earth sent ships to evacuate property species from worlds where violence broke out, stretching their resources even thinner. President Stone authorized the use of military vessels for humanitarian missions, which technically violated several council protocols. General Chen warned it could be seen as an act of war, but Stone was firm. We started this, she said. We don't abandon them now. The turning point came from an unexpected source. The Minvari, a council species known for their isolationist policies and rigid adherence to tradition, broke with the property bloc. Their representative, speaking for the first time in 50 years of council membership, delivered a brief statement. The Minvari have reviewed the arguments and evidence. We find the property classification system to be logically inconsistent with observed behavior. We support provisional citizenship for all previously classified species. Further, we offer immediate trade agreements with Earth to offset economic pressure from the property bloc. It was a stunning reversal. The Minvari were one of the wealthiest species in the galaxy. Their support meant Earth could survive the sanctions. More importantly, their reputation for logical thinking gave credibility to the movement for reform. Within a week, 5 more species followed the Minvari's lead. Then 10 more. The property bloc found itself losing members as the economic cost of maintaining the strikes outweighed the profit from property trade. Representative Vorth made one final attempt to stop the momentum. This council is allowing itself to be manipulated by economic terrorism. The property species have been incited to rebellion by Earth's interference. We should be crushing this resistance, not rewarding it. Hilra's response was measured but devastating. Representative Vorth, you argue that property species lack the cognitive ability for self-determination. Yet they have organized a galaxy-wide strike movement, maintained communication networks across thousands of systems, and demonstrated strategic thinking that rivals many council member species. Either they are property and incapable of such organization, meaning someone else is controlling them, or they are sapient beings capable of advocating for their own rights. Which is it? Vorth had no answer. The logical trap was perfect. The council voted 3 days later. Provisional citizenship for all formerly classified property species passed with 68% approval. It wasn't everything the reformers wanted. The former property species would have limited rights until a final determination was made after comprehensive review. But they couldn't be bought or sold. They couldn't be beaten or killed. They had legal standing to seek employment and shelter. It was a beginning. Michael watched the vote results from his restaurant, Tika standing beside him along with dozens of other beings who had found refuge there. When the results appeared, the room erupted in celebration. Species that had never been allowed to show joy openly, that had spent lifetimes being told they weren't people, embraced and cried and laughed. Tika looked at Michael with tears in her large eyes. You did this. You and your species. You saw us when no one else would. Michael shook his head. No, you did this. All of you. We just gave you a platform. You found your voice and used it. Perhaps it was both, Tika said. Perhaps that is what change requires. Someone to say what is right and others willing to fight for it. 1 year after Michael Grant noticed the bruises on his cook's arms, the first Galactic Rights Summit convened on neutral ground. The location chosen was Station Unity, a newly constructed facility funded jointly by Earth and the Minvari. Representatives from over 300 species gathered, including dozens of former property species attending as provisional citizens with limited voting rights. Michael had been invited as an observer, though he felt profoundly out of place among diplomats and leaders. He stood in the observation gallery watching the opening ceremonies. Tika was down on the main floor as part of the Valorian delegation. In the past year, she had become something unexpected, a voice for her people, speaking at conferences and meetings across the galaxy. President Stone approached Michael. "Never thought I'd be thanking a restaurant owner for reshaping galactic politics." "I just freed one person," Michael said. "Everyone else did the real work. You did more than that. You reminded the galaxy what it means to see someone as a person. That's not a small thing. The summit's purpose was to establish the final framework for integrating former property species into galactic civilization. The debates were complex and often heated. Questions about reparations, about restructuring economies that had relied on property trade, about educating species that had been deliberately kept ignorant. Representative Vorth attended, diminished, but still defiant. His species had lost significant political power as the property trade collapsed. "This summit pretends we can simply erase 10,000 years of galactic structure," he said during the opening debate. "The economic chaos alone has cost trillions. Entire industries have collapsed. And for what? To satisfy the moral preening of one idealistic species?" Ambassador Osi stood to respond. "Representative Vorth, you're correct that the changes have been costly, but Earth's analysis suggests the property system was already failing. Productivity among property species was declining as populations were worked to exhaustion. Resistance movements were growing. The strikes demonstrated that we didn't cause instability. We simply accelerated a transition that was inevitable." Hilra added her voice. "Moreover, preliminary studies show that free labor is more efficient than forced labor. Former property species working in voluntary employment on Earth and Minvari worlds show 37% higher productivity than when they were classified as property. This transition will ultimately strengthen galactic economy, not weaken it." Tika requested speaking privileges, which was granted after brief debate. She stood at a podium designed for species much larger than her, but her voice carried clearly. "Representatives ask what becomes of species like mine now that we are no longer property. I will tell you. We work as we always have, but now we work for wages we can spend as we choose. We learn, educating ourselves in subjects we were forbidden to study. We create, building businesses and art and families without fear they will be taken from us. We participate, contributing to galactic civilization as partners rather than tools." She paused, looking around the chamber. "You ask if we can handle freedom. We ask if you can handle treating us as equals. That is the real question." The summit lasted 3 weeks. Agreements were reached on transition frameworks, on education initiatives, on economic restructuring. The final declaration, signed by 247 species, established the Universal Rights Covenant. It wasn't perfect. It left many details unresolved, but it formally abolished property, classifications, and established baseline rights for all sapient beings regardless of genetic, markers, or species origin. Earth's role was acknowledged in the Covenant's preamble, along with recognition of the resistance movements that had forced the issue. Michael's name appeared in the historical record, though he insisted his contribution was minor compared to the millions of beings who had risked everything to claim their freedom. The real test came in the months that followed. Former property species faced discrimination even with their new legal status. Some found themselves unemployed as industries adapted to paying wages. Others faced violence from species resentful of the economic disruption. Earth opened immigration, accepting hundreds of thousands of refugees, straining resources but maintaining the commitment President Stone had made. Michael returned to running his restaurant, though it had become famous across the galaxy. Beings traveled to Station Meridian specifically to eat at the place where the change had begun. Michael hired former property species exclusively, paying fair wages and creating what he hoped was a model for how things should work. Tika eventually left to establish her own restaurant, which she named Freedom's Kitchen. It became wildly successful, serving Valorian cuisine that most of the galaxy had never experienced because property species weren't allowed to cook their own cultural foods. 2 years after the summit, Michael received a message from Representative Hilra. "I thought you should know. The final review commission has completed its work. All species formerly classified as property have been granted full citizenship rights in council space. The property system is officially ended. Your actions, Antika's courage, and the resistance of millions have fundamentally changed galactic civilization. Michael read the message to his staff during their pre-service meeting. They were a diverse group now, 3 humans, 5 Valorians, 2 Kelpari, a Yith, and several other species. They celebrated briefly, then got to work. There were customers to serve, meals to prepare, lives to live. That evening, as Michael closed up the restaurant, he found Tika waiting outside. She had become successful enough to own her own ship now, traveling between worlds, but she still visited Station Meridian regularly. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, "for seeing me when I was supposed to be invisible." Michael shook his head. "You were never invisible. You were always there. I just finally opened my eyes." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the stars visible through the station's transparent panels. Ships from hundreds of species passed by, carrying cargo and passengers, conducting the business of galactic civilization. It looked the same as it had years ago, but everything had changed. "What will you do now?" Michael asked. "You could be on the council yourself if you wanted. Your people would vote for you." Tika's expression showed something that might have been amusement. "Perhaps someday, but right now, I am doing what I want to do. Cooking, creating, living freely. That is enough." "Yeah," Michael agreed. "That's enough." The galaxy had changed because one person noticed bruises on another person's arms and decided that wasn't acceptable. It was a small act that cascaded into something larger. But really, Tika was right. It wasn't just Michael's action. It was her courage to trust him. It was the resistance networks that had waited generations for their moment. It was species like the Minvari making unexpected choices. It was President Stone refusing to back down. It was millions of small decisions by billions of beings all pointing in the same direction. Freedom wasn't given. It was claimed. And once claimed, it changed everything. Michael watched Tika walk away toward her ship, her 4 arms carrying containers of spices she had ordered specifically for her restaurant. She moved with confidence now, no longer hunched in the submissive posture property species were trained to maintain. She held her head high. And Michael understood that while the galaxy would remember grand speeches and council votes and economic transformations, what mattered most was simpler than that. One being treating another being with basic dignity, seeing someone, really seeing them. That was where it all began, and that was where it would continue, one person at a time, one choice at a time, building a galaxy where everyone could cook, create, and live freely. It was, Michael thought, a pretty good foundation for the future.